Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge. Joining me today, I have a Jer.
Hello.
And a Wheeler.
I drank too much smoothie before this.
Haven't we all? Reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Let's talk about today's episode. Today is the Jumpstart set review. Now, really quick, Jumpstart isn't a full set. This is, actually, Wheeler, help me out here. This is an expansion to Core 2021. Is that right?
Kinda. It's like a supplemental product that is slightly tied in with Core 2021. The cards aren't going to be legal in Standard. It's kind of formatted in a way, kind of like Pack Wars almost. There's like themed boosters where you shuffle them up and play them, and it's primarily reprints. However, there are some new cards introduced that will be new to Magic in general, which means they're new to Canadian Highlander.
Now, in our set review, we want to acknowledge that Jumpstart is reprint heavy. And as with most of our set reviews, this is not going to be exhaustive. We're not going to talk about every card. We're not going to talk about everything that's necessarily going to see play either. We want to focus on cards that we think are going to make for an interesting discussion. So if something is an auto-include or already a format staple, we're probably not going to talk about it because you probably already know it. That being said, we don't want to exclude people who are newer to the format or aren't as entrenched in the format. So you might see us talk about some cards that are right on that line. And that's the balancing act that we're trying to do with this set review. So let's start it off with talking about Unicorn Tribal, ? Emil the Blessed, 4 mana 4/4 legendary unicorn for 2 white, activated ability for 3 generic, exile another target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. And then we have another ability here. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay a Selesnya hybrid, that's what that's called. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it. If it's a unicorn, you get 2 +1/+1 counters instead. Jer, start us off.
This is a really cool card. It's great in the value blink decks. And I think there also might be something with like Palinchron, Peregrine Drake type cards. It's very easy to go infinite with those. Generating arbitrary large mana and ETB triggers is often a good way to win the game. And if you're just looking to beat down, the combination of both the abilities here is pretty good. And it's a very reasonable body for the stats. 4/4 for 4 is nothing to scoff at.
Well, fantastic. Let's move on to another white 4-drop. Linvala, Keeper of Silence, 4 mana 3/4 legendary angel for 2 white, has flying, and activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. Now, this is a reprint. Jer, tell us about Linvala.
This card has been playable in Highlander for a long time, most notably used to shut down creature combo decks, often in creature combo decks, ironically enough. So you're using the best weapon against your deck to shut down your opponent's deck. But it's one of the best tools for white decks to shut down hoof and opposing creature combo decks, because often white creature decks don't have the swath of removal to slow them down enough, so they have to rely on heavier hitting haymaker cards to try to swing those matchups in their favor. It's also just, once again, like a very efficient body, and flying pressures planeswalkers well, kills opponents well.
Yeah, basically, if it's a 3/4 flyer that has some kind of relevant text associated with it, it's probably playable.
Has it been seeing less play lately? Because I remember this was like one of the go-to finishers in, Bant Blade. It was that, and the other 4-drop was, Armageddon or something like that. I haven't seen as much Linvala recently.
I think it's always sort of depending on the meta calls, because as you say, it is often included as one of the few 4-drops in a deck. So it just depends on how worried you are about opposing creature combo decks, as opposed to like Storm or Control or other stuff. Because like if you have this against a control deck, it's like, it's not bad, but there are lots of things you'd rather have.
Yeah, especially with like not only the 4-drop slot being so competitive for stuff like Death and Taxes or white-based creature strategies, but the 3-drop and 2-drop, right? You have to cut cards that have been kind of staples in these archetypes for so long, which can mean that sometimes you're cutting cards that may have traditionally helped out against the creature combo decks. Cards like, Imposing Sovereign. You might not have Imposing Sovereign and Kinjali Sunwing in the same deck. So you might need to include Linvala as, a top end card that also helps impact the creature decks. But if you want that redundancy lower, then you can start to play a heavier kind of like hitting 4-drop, like a Planeswalker or a Hero of Bladehold.
All right, let's talk about another reprint in white, Path to Exile. Single white mana lets you exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for basic land, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Jer.
This is one of the best removal spells ever printed. It's played in nearly every white deck in the format, barring some combo decks that are just splashing white. The definition of format staple.
It's not going to find its way into every single, like a storm deck that has white in it for access of like swords, or sorry, not swords. Well, swords technically, but like silences and Teferi. They might extend their white splash to include Swords to Plowshares, but rarely are they going to go as deep as Path to Exile.
All right, let's talk about a new card here. 4-mana sorcery, Release the Dogs. 3 and a white gets you 4/1/1 white dog creature tokens. Wheeler.
So, geez, I thought there was more text to that card. It's really straightforward. So the tokens decks, even if you are just limiting yourself to white-green, one of the things that they don't lack is generating tokens. And so while there aren't many token generators that you pay 4 mana, get 4 creatures, like that's a surprisingly good rate, but that's not really what you're looking to do at 4. Like, you're looking to make some tokens, go wide, turn 2, 3, maybe even, turn 1 if you're playing Moxen or whatever. And then on 4, that's when you really start to, make your tokens relevant instead of just playing more tokens. So
sort of like the now what? You're like, I've got all these little 1/1s. Now what?
Yeah, like if you spend your first couple of turns building up a board of like 1/1s and like I don't know, even like playing a Blade Splicer to make a 3/3, like they're just a bunch of stats on dorky bodies. So your opponent, they play out like a Kitchen Finks or something, and they're like, okay, well, now it's your turn. What are you going to do? And you're like, well, here's my 4-mana Haymaker, more 1/1s. Usually not. Yeah, it's usually not the recipe for success. I kind of rather would use that to deploy, a Planeswalker, or make my monsters grow. So yeah, as much as I like the whole, dog tokens and paying 4 mana, getting 4 bodies, there are just better things to play. Stuff like, if you do want more token generators, I mean, March of the Multitudes or like SRAM's expertise is probably underutilized for these decks. They kind of do a similar thing, but are a bit stronger and have more flexibility.
All right, let's talk about another new card in white here. Stonehaven Pilgrim. 2-mana 2/2 core cleric for 1 and a white. When it attacks, if you control an artifact or enchantment, it gets +1/+1 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Wheeler.
So if you're playing a deck like a white-based artifact aggressive deck or enchantment aggressive even, chances are you can do a lot better than a 2-mana 3/3 with lifelink. It's very easy to get it to be a 2-mana 3/3 with lifelink, but again, that's only on attack. It means it just dies to shock, which is pretty bad. It doesn't block super well. So I would avoid playing this kind of card in that scenario. Like, honestly, if you're like an Academy aggro deck or like an enchantment, like an auras kind of deck, assuming you're not just jam-packed full of hexproof creatures, like something like Seeker of the Way is just going to be a million times better.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have the non-creature spells to deploy. You only really need to do 1 to get the same kind of effect on this, but it also provides a little more utility in protecting it and blowing people out in combat.
God, Seeker of the Way is just so much better than this in every way.
Yeah, that card's like a roller coaster.
Do you think this is reasonable in the Boros equipment deck if that ever formulates?
Hi, as the probably the person with the most games in Boros equipment out of the three of us. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah. There's actually a number of effects like this in both red and white, a little bit in blue. You know, it's a 1/1. If you control an artifact, it becomes a 2/2. And I've never really liked any of those creatures. I mean, the best you can do sort of for that is maybe a very cheap double striker. But even then, even with a density of those effects now, I don't really want like an Isamaru that's dependent on other things, right? I don't think that's where you want to go with this. I'd rather have either evasion or double striker.
Your card quality is just so much higher, right?
Yeah. Like even that's what this card made me think of, and I was just like, this is a marginally better version of something we already have, and I just don't think it's good enough to replace just a normal like mid-range threat, right?
Yep.
All right, let's move on to blue. Let's talk about a new card, Archaeo Mender. 3 mana, 2/3 human wizard for 2 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand, Wheeler.
God, I've been waiting so long for this kind of card. It's not exactly like, look, you're not winning too many awards with this, but it's impressive just how big of a difference taking like a treasure hunter or trusty pack beast, like any of the like 2 and a color mana, usually 2 and a white for a creature that returns an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Make it blue, make it so that you can cast it off of Academy. How many combos it can open up, which is funny because I'm about to say that, you know, looping this with Tashar, which is a white card, so then you could already do this with treasure hunter, makes it kind of spicy. The fact that it's a wizard is kind of nice. Like, it's not an absolute slam dunk by any means, but it's just something that I have been looking for a card as a cheap blue creature, 3 or less CMC that can bring back artifacts from the graveyard. Now we finally have it. So now we get to figure out whether or not these loops I've been trying to craft for the past decade. Yeah. It's like, it might just be really disappointing. Like, and that's fine.
Monkey's paw curls, and you're like, oh, I got what I wished for, I guess.
Yeah, that's truly the combo players. Like, that's just the life as a combo player, is that you're like, oh, we finally got this card that I've been waiting for. And they're like, so is it good? It's like, oh, no. But now I know that it's not good. And it's like, oh, okay.
I kind of like that it's a 2 mana 2/3, whereas Trinket Mage, which is the card that this reminds me of, is a 2 mana 2/2 power creep, right, my dudes?
Well, one of those cards can tutor Black Lotus, so,
and the other one can get it back, right?
Yeah, exactly. They work in tandem. You could play a certain land that we're coming up on later. Actually, honestly, you could, but yeah. Anyways, yeah, I like this card.
Next up, we have Curious Obsession. This is a reprint. 1 mana aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't attack with a creature this turn, sacrifice Curious Obsession. Wheeler.
You there, combo player, or sorry, not combo, tempo player in the audience. Why aren't you playing this? Please play this card. It's very good.
It's very good.
It's very good. It gets out of hand pretty quickly. The fact that you don't necessarily need to attack with the creature that it's enchanted on, softens the blow if, say, early in the game, you throw it on like a werebear or something, a Seeker of the Way maybe, and you just can't draw the cards to really get it through. Like, maybe you draw all threats, no disruption, but you have a flyer or some kind of evasive thing, a Tarmogoyf, something that can attack with relative impunity. You don't lose the card. It gets out of control. Like, it's amazing how much slapping +1/+1 onto an effect like Curiosity just skyrockets it. It's like, you constantly hear about how, add the word draw a card to a card in Magic and just look how broken it ends up being, right? Like, Veil of Summer's a great example. I think one of the other, like, the new-ish equivalent of that is just add +1/+1 and see how much better it gets.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about another reprint here. This one's going back a ways. Kirra, Great Glass Spinner. 3 mana 2/2 legendary spirit for 1 blue, has flying, and creatures you control have. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time in a turn, counter that spell or ability. Chair.
I love this card. I still play it a lot. Other people don't play it as often, but it can just create situations where they're printing better and better hate bears. And this is one of the best possible ways to protect your hate bears, especially against the combo decks that are often built to draw one piece of interaction per game or use an excess tutor to find one piece of interaction per game. And this just often stymies those decks completely. Also good against control and mid-range decks.
The one clunkiness thing I've experienced with that card is, you have your Jite and Kirra in play, and you're just like, well, I can either pay 4 mana or
Don't you hate it when you have an Umezawa's Jite in play and this like unkillable creature? Ugh, the worst.
You can goozle yourself. I have definitely goozled myself with Kirra, and it's an occupational hazard when you're playing the card.
But I think it's one of those things that comes up not very often, but it feels bad, so people tend to focus on those like not very often occurring feels bad moments and using that to bias their decisions against.
I guess if you looked at all the data, games won versus games lost.
There was this one game where I could have berserked my creature and won, but I had Kirra in play, so I couldn't.
It's like the having Spirit of the Labyrinth plus the Monarch. It's just like, I'll do it. Like, I'm going to Palace Jailer and get the Monarch, or even Throne of the High City in some of these decks. But I will still play Spirit of the Labyrinth and occasionally goozle myself. But
that's fair. All right, let's move on to a new card from the set. Scholar of the Lost Trove. 7 mana, 5/5 Sphinx for 5 blue. Has flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant, sorcery, or artifact from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If an instant or sorcery cast this way would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Jer.
This card is pretty interesting. It probably only has one really obvious home, and that's Reanimator. Either using it to sort of double down on a reanimation spell, or to reanimate a giant artifact, of which there are several good ones. Yeah, good in Reanimator. I don't know if it has any other combo implications, Ben.
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely gonna try and flash this card out.
Really?
What are you gonna get?
Probably gonna try to cast Enter the Infinite. Like, I'm gonna play it in like a Flash Rector style deck, kind of in like a, or in a. I haven't look. I'll level with you. I haven't gotten the specifics, but if I'm gonna flash out like an Academy Rector to get Omniscience, flash out this thing to cast an Enter the Infinite that's in my graveyard from that, or play it in like that Grixis kind of like Mizzix's Mastery style combo deck that Alex and I got way too giddy over about 20 episodes back or so. The fact that you can like entomb for this card, and then you play this card in decks with entomb, which means that you can also just find yourself, if you've drawn an entomb after you have this card available to reanimate, is you can kind of just pick your poison for double dutying, right? I think this card's pretty good in that.
Is there a world in which this goes into Academy or any of like the big mana blue decks?
So it's funny you mentioned that, Serge. The thing about this card is that the whole exile the card instead of putting it in the graveyard, it only applies to instants and sorceries, meaning that you just get to cast an artifact. And it's an artifact, it's a permanent, so it's probably going to sit and play, which means that if you, say, pick some kind of artifact that could either cause this card to exile itself, then come back into play, or, if you are able to find something to get rid of this card and then have it somehow come back later, maybe I'll play this in Eggs, maybe I'll play this in Academy. Like, when I saw this card, I had like an Animaniac style, like, oh god, like eyes out, heart out, kind of like pounding the table sort of thing. And after I calmed down, I was like, okay, well, as Jer said, Reanimator's where this like really shines.
Sure.
But it just like, it's a really broken ability, right? This feels like an ability that would have been, like, if you read me this card, like, if you're reading this card out, I hadn't seen it, I may have asked you to clarify, like, sorry, does it have the if you cast it from your hand clause?
Yeah, not even
attached to it?
Let's talk about Vidale Can Arc Mage. This is a 4-mana 0/2 Vidalcan Wizard for 2 blue, and it has whenever you play an artifact spell, draw a card. This is also a reprint. Wheeler, what do you think?
Between this card and it's like this card and Joyra, people ask me about like, oh, how come you never play this in Eggs? Or why don't you play this in Academy? Like, it's blue. It draws you cards when you play artifacts. That sounds exactly what you want. But I got one word for you, Serge. Lightning bolt. No, it's shock. Shock. It's shock. 0/2 is just, it's too small. No, this card's a bit too clunky for those kind of decks. I mean, if you really go all in and you're just like, like I'll play, like you could probably try and do like a Cheerio style deck where you'll play something like this, but not in anything resembling like a traditional Academy build.
Have we seen anyone try this card? Like the fact that this is a reprint kind of shocks me because I don't think I've ever seen it.
I found this card to be pretty awful, like very quickly. Like when I was like playing, and mind you, this was, you know, almost a decade ago by now, but like trying this card out in like older kind of Academy style decks and just being like, oh,
Yeah, this is an old Mirrodin card, right?
yeah, it's from Mirrodin proper. But yeah, it was just like, oh, I just lost to a card that my deck is built to just like completely ignore, right? Like every other creature that you're going to play in like any of these decks, like Urza, Sai, Oriok Salvagers, you know, the relevant creatures you want to hang around, they're going to survive shock, and a lot of them are actually going to survive lightning bolt. But like this one just dies to a slight breeze.
And this one also doesn't do as good a job of winning you the game when things are going right. Like all those creatures need something to be going right. Yeah. But if that thing goes right, you're way more likely to win the game than with this.
Yeah, they're both defensive and like combo pieces, which is pretty big for playing any kind of creature in decks like this.
All right, let's move on to black, and let's start off with another reprint here. Drona, Liberator of Malakir. Legendary Vampire Ally, 2/3 for 1 black. It has flying and first strike, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. Wheeler.
Drona is kind of the stand-in for like aggressive black decks, be it mono black or I guess like Golgari and Rakdos as well. I've been pretty impressed with Rakdos aggro actually in the past, well, since Ikoria, but that deck was probably actually good for quite some time and we just didn't pay it enough attention. But just like black-based aggro decks in general, I think I've gotten a lot better and kind of quietly so, right? Like they're not as flashy as, say, the red decks, and admittedly, they're not going to be as reliable, but they attack the metagame in a very specific way that is quite resilient and frankly really annoying. And I think that Drona is just kind of like this is a 3-drop that you'll absolutely play. It's pip dense, it's super snowbally, but that's kind of what that deck does, is that the black decks just like snowball out of control, you know, with Rotting Regisaur, well, Drona. And then if they fall behind, like if they get board cleared or if their opponent gains a bunch of life, like you're not as based around having reach. You're more based around hitting like an absolute truck and being able to rebuild from a Wrath of God. So, yeah, right consider this my PSA of, hey, tap a basic swamp and play a Carnophage, why don't you?
All right, next up we have another reprint, but an older one, in Tumor X Arc. 4-mana 2/2 Cleric for 2 black. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, or target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-creature card from it, and that player discards it. Jer.
This card's a really interesting utility card for largely used in creature combo decks and occasionally black midrange decks. I've played it a lot in both. It has a lot of interesting applications. Notably, it's one of the few discard spells that can take target lands out of an opposing player's hand. So if lots of players will slow roll Academy or Gaia's Cradle or specific lands in certain matchups when they think you might have access to to strip mine or wasteland, and this is a way to punish them for doing that.
I never put that together. Yeah, it always says non-creature, non-land, and I just filled in the rest of that text. Whoa!
Yeah, especially in creature combo decks where you have the ability to use your library as a toolbox pretty effectively with cards like Birthing Pod and Survival of the Fittest. Being able to get this card can win you some games that way. Also, just of course, taking tutors out of combo decks and so on. Very useful. Also good in control and mid-range matchups for rebuying key combo creatures or value creatures to try to grind them out.
All right, next up we have another reprint, and actually a former best card you're not playing, Gaunty, Lord of Luxury. 4 mana 2/3 legendary Aetherborn Rogue for 2 black, has Death Touch, and when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library. Exile 1 face down, then put the rest on the bottom of that library in a random order. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it and cast it, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast it. Jer.
This is just a really powerful value card, most commonly played in mid-range decks, often paired with green to try to make the 4 mana cost feel a little bit better. But getting a 2/3 Death Toucher that essentially casts a cantrip when it ETBs is a really powerful effect, and one that can help you start attritioning out your opponent, and in certain instances can just win you the game. Like if you happen to get lucky and hit your opponent's Ancestral Recall, they're probably not winning. If you happen to get lucky and take your Scapeshift opponent's Valakut, which has happened, they're probably not winning. If you happen to get lucky and hit your Storm opponent's Tendrils, they're probably not winning, although less so now that Underworld Breach is a Magic card. But
so out of curiosity, how many times do you need Gaunty to enter the battlefield to be good?
One.
Just the one time. You don't need to like abuse it or anything. It's just fine as a value creature.
It's really powerful with things like Recurring Nightmare and reanimation spells, but it's going to trade with their best attacker because it has Death Touch, and it got you a card. So it's just super hard to trade with effectively from your opponent's side, and it can give you access to things that your opponent isn't prepared for. Like if you're a black-green like mid-range attrition-y deck, getting access to a single counterspell can often change the tide of a game if you use it effectively, or getting access to a big haymaker that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, or there's a lot of interesting things that come up from playing this card.
All right, let's move on to Kells FightFixer. 4 mana 4/3 legendary Azra Warlock for 2 black, has Menace, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may pay blue-black hybrid. If you do, draw a card. And then for 1 and sacrifice a creature, Kells FightFixer gains indestructible until end of turn. Wheeler.
This card is kind of just like secretly a 5-drop in the sense that, like, unless you have additional tools to protect Kells, then I don't know if I really want to expose her to bolt to 3 damage effects. But assuming you can keep her safe, she hits like a truck. Like 4 power menace is nothing to, turn your nose up at. Like anybody that's played against, say, Massacre Girl,
Goblin Dark Dwellers.
Yeah, you catch on like, oh, I don't have that much life. The blue activation's kind of interesting. You're probably more or less just going to play black every single time. I just don't know if I'm actually looking to play this card in the 4-drop slot of like an Aristocrat style deck. I might consider this in like maybe a bug deck that has the ability to sacrifice stuff. There was an Esper deck I played a while ago that was kind of like an Esper ETB. It had Crystal Shard in it. It was not that great, but it ended up doing pretty well. Maybe in something like that. But this card, like, I think it might just have a bit too much going against it for it to see play and break through for like where you would expect a card that draws you more cards when you sacrifice stuff, as well as having a sack outlet attached to it. Aristocrats. I think there's too much against it for that in that deck, and like maybe in other like niche strategies it could find some room, but I'm not as impressed as I'd hope.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's move on to the cutest name in the set, Tiny Bones, the Trinket Thief. You get a 2-mana 1/2 legendary skeleton rogue for 1 and a black. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discarded a card, you draw a card and lose a life. And then activated ability, 6 mana, 4 black. Each opponent with no cards in hand loses 10 life. Jer.
I actually think this card is pretty powerful. You only need to activate the first ability once, and then it makes it totally worthwhile. If you ever get 2 activations, you're laughing. And I think people are going to underestimate how often that second ability is going to end the game, because you can use it at instant speed. It's very hard to not go hellbent during a prolonged game that black is often exceptional at playing, as long as things go according to plan. And the first ability will help things go according to plan. So
I have a very important question here, which is, what deck does this go into, though?
I think you can play it in a black mid-range deck and utilize cards that are borderline, but haven't been played that much. Like, you can use Davriel, which I've wanted to find an excuse to play more of. I actually think that card's just pretty good. Like, almost every Liliana has a either each player discards or target player discards mode. I think there are a lot of interesting things you can do. Like, you can use cards like wheels, or there are a bunch of repeatable wheels, or even the 2 mana one that says you have no maximum hand size and you loot in your draw step or in your upkeep. Anvil of Bogarden.
The Serge Classic.
It's been so long. Sorry. It's just like, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Anvil of Bogarden. So, like, let's be real. Is this the sort of card you have to make discard dot deck to make it work? Or is this, you think there's enough incidental black in hand attack and the ability is powerful enough by itself, you just slam it in anything?
I think you can't slam it at anything, that's for certain. But I think I'm interested in sort of doing with this what I did with Mardu Life Gain, where I just like took a Mardu midrange shell and shoved a synergy package into it. I might try to do something similar. Is like take a midrange deck, and then like take out a few of the midrange cards and shove like a discard synergy package into it.
There are so many cards that also, because it's each end step and it doesn't specify that your effects have to cause them to discard, like Royal Scions, Dak Faden.
Yeah, if they loot it all. Yeah.
New Teferi, Survival of the Fittest.
Just like so many cards have them discarding cards.
So we're not sleeving up. What's that old 2 mana enchantment in black?
Waste Not.
Waste Not. So we're not making like Waste Not dot deck. Tiny Bones isn't suddenly bringing that back, eh?
I mean, you can.
I wouldn't if your object is to win games of Magic the Gathering.
I'm going to be honest. I was sleeping on Tiny Bones, and you've opened my eyes. Very interesting.
Weird sentence.
All right, let's move on to Witch of the Moors. This is the final black card we're going to talk about today, and another one of the new cards from the set. 5 mana 4/4 human warlock. The art has way too many arms for 3 black. Black has Death Touch, and at the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and you return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Wheeler.
This is possibly one of my favorite cards of like the past year. It's just so cool, and it lines up really nicely with basically everything that I've been trying to force in Highlander again for the past year. It's so easy to gain life. It is so easy. It's not even attached to a specific amount. You just have to gain life in any way, shape, or form. Lifelink creatures, any kind of like triggered ability, and being able to, like, you make them sacrifice a creature, which, you know, it's not always the best. You know, people might have dorks running around, but as a black deck, hey, you're pretty good at killing X1s with either like Plague Engineer or Liliana the Last Hope, stuff like that. And then rebuying a creature. Like, this is an effect that costs like 3 mana, 4 mana or so. And you get it every single one of your end steps. Combine this in a deck that's probably playing stuff like Custodial Lich as well. And
This card reminds me a lot of Custodial Lich, but I think it's better. And Custodial Lich is absurd.
Interesting. I just look at this as a 5-drop, and I'm just like, that's so much mana.
Custody Lich is a 5-drop.
yeah, it's just...
How many times have you got absolutely ruined by that card?
More than I admit, but like, I look at, Thundermaw Hellkite. I'm like, all right, that's a 5-drop that's going to kill me. And I look at this and I think to myself, I've got time. How much damage could this 5-mana 4/4 possibly do?
I don't know if you have much time, dude. It's got 4 power.
And it's killing all your creatures and bringing more creatures back.
Yeah. Imagine somebody bringing back like Karmic Guide every single turn with this. Or, well, every turn if you do it properly. Or like, I don't know, any way to protect this card or reanimate this card. I don't know if I'm on team better than Custodial Lich yet. I obviously need to play with it, and drawing cards is...
It's obviously deck contextual as well.
But... Yeah, absolutely. But like, it may be 5, but once it's basically this pendulum axe just slowly coming down from the ceiling. Like once this starts going, the game is going to end relatively quickly.
All right, let's talk about red cards now. First up, we have Chained Brute. This is a 2-mana 4/3 devil for 1 and a red. Doesn't untap during your untap step. 1 and sack another creature, untap it. Activate this ability only during your turn. Wheeler.
Hell yeah, I hate this card. It's so bad. I don't play this card, please. It's I know it's appealing in the sense that like you see 4 power at 2 mana, great. You see a sack outlet, coolio.
It comes into play untapped. You can turn it sideways once.
Right, but like it's one of the things of like what kind of decks do you want to play this in, right?
If this was 1 mana, would you play it?
If it was a 1 mana 4/3?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah, at that, I might consider it just because it's also a sack outlet if I absolutely need it to be later.
I even think then it's not good enough, but...
Yeah, it's not something I'm jumping for joy.
Like, it's no Vexing Devil, eh?
Well, I'm just... I look at this card and I, like, do not care about it, right? Like, the stats on it don't matter because it costs 2 mana to play and 1 mana to use this ability only on your turn.
Yeah, basically every deck is just like, okay, I'll take 4, and then it's going to make you jump through the hoops and then kill it.
All right, let's move on then to Dual Caster Mage. 3 mana 2/2 human wizard for 1 red, has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery. You may choose new targets. Jer, tell us about this classic reprint.
I love this card. I've had some of the biggest blowouts I've ever had in Highlander with this card. And it's also part of a nice combo with the red Strive card that I can't remember the name of.
What? Oh, Twin Flame?
Twin Flame, that's the one. Thank you.
There we go.
I was blanking. Yeah, but it's just so nice to have access. It's very tutorable. It's found with both recruiters. You can get it with Mystical Teachings because it has flash. I honestly think it's in some metas just fine as a value card.
Very cool. Let's move on to this is a very iconic card to me in Highlander. Especially, I guess, when I first started playing the format, when I thought of Highlander, I think of Flame Tongue Kavu. 4 mana 4/2 Kavu for 3 and a red. When it enters the battlefield, deal 4 damage to target creature. That old templating where if you don't have a legal target, it has to shoot itself. I love it. Wheeler, tell me about FTK.
I mean, Flame Tongue is just kind of one of the cards that is somewhat responsible for the creation of Highlander, is to have a format where a card like this has a home, which pains me to say that I don't know if this card has a home, or at least as much of a home as it used to. You could still see this card and say like a Jund or like a red-green kind of like mid-rangey monsters style deck, but I've cut this card's just being cut from like Jeskai decks. Basically every Jeskai or Grixis deck, unless you're like a 2-for-1 kind of like this into Custodial Lich.
You know what's great though? It could slip back into a deck tomorrow and kill me and I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be like, hey look, FTK killed me. Classic Highlander.
It definitely has that, like, the effect is good. Like, it's a good effect, right? It's like and it hits like a truck. So it's something you always kind of have to like keep in your back pocket and not entirely count it out if you're building a deck. Like if you're looking, you're like, oh, I need like a 4-drop that like just deals with something on the board. Flame Tongue Kavu, well, am I really playing FTK? Like, don't get caught in the like, well, this people said this card wasn't as good anymore and I haven't seen it, so I shouldn't play it. But I mean, in general, unless it's filling a very particular kind of niche, I would just play something else. A Planeswalker.
Well, how about this classic reprint? 4-mana Hellrider. Devil, 3/3, haste for 2 red. And whenever a creature you control attacks, Hellrider deals 1 damage to defending player. JR.
I actually think people are starting to sleep on this card. It's not really played in the red deck wins decks anymore, and it's not really played too much in the red-green aggro decks, which are the traditional homes. But I do think there are some decks, like the tokens decks we talked about earlier. I think it's easy to incorporate red into those, where you can just ranch people with this card. And I think Hellrider's time is coming back.
Hellrider just ends games.
Yeah, I was just about to say, it's like one of the cards where your opponent, the most often that causes your opponent to just go, well, I'm dead. Like, absolutely nothing.
I haven't even thought of this card. Torbrand's been printed.
It's really good with Torbrand.
Yeah.
Right? Choo choo.
Yeah, don't sleep on the Hellreezy. Like this, you can't predict Hellrider damage, right? It's just one of those things that like it hits like a truck, and if you're not prepared for it, you're dying to it. And even if you're prepared for it, often you're dying to it.
Well, it's one of those cards you often just like can't prepare for. Like if a red deck curves 1, 2, 3, you're often just dead to Hellrider, whether you were prepared or not. And I said put prepared in fake
air quotes.
Air quotes.
All right. All the rest of the red cards, no more reprints, all new and exciting fresh cards. Let's start with Lightning Phoenix. 3-mana 2/2 Phoenix for 2 and a red. Has flying and haste. Can't block. And at the beginning of your end step, if an opponent was dealt 3 or more damage this turn, you may pay red. If you do, return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. Wheeler.
Oh, I'm a sucker for a good Phoenix. And this one isn't a good Phoenix. It's a great Phoenix. It hits kind of hard. Like, I mean, two in the air is nice, right? It's not anything to write home about. It's not Hellrider damage. But often it's pretty hard to deal with. And then when you combine the fact that the return cost of this at 1 red is cheaper than basically any other Phoenix, the way in which you get it back is you, a red deck, have to deal 3 damage to your opponent. And it doesn't have to be non-combat damage either. It's just damage. Like, that cost is real easy to hit. Jeremy and I were talking about this card before we hit record, and that, you know, it might have a better time in like an Is It deck where you can reliably put it in the graveyard through, say, like Thought Scours, Faithless Lootings, that kind of thing. And I'm inclined to agree that I don't think like a traditional red deck wins is the best shell for this. Stuff like Is It, stuff like Medium Red comes to mind, just again because of Ancient Tomb mana. But like, that's not to say this is bad in red. This card's really good. Really good.
Cool. Let's move on to Lightning Visionary. 2/1 Minotaur Shaman for 1 and a red with prowess. Wheeler.
It's a 2-power creature that costs 2 that has prowess. Great. That's it. Play it. You'll play it in the decks that want to play this kind of thing. It's
better than Mage Ring Bully.
Yeah, you'll take the trade-off for the 2 toughness to the 1 toughness, because attacks each combat if able might be one of the worst lines of text on any card, like that is recurring.
Especially in red, because your opponent just plays like a Rock's Warmonk or a Batterskull or, God forbid, like a Wormcoil Engine in 2020.
It's like, no.
And then you're just staring at your Mage Ring Bully and you're like, well, have to bolt this now. Like,
the reason why red decks and accomplished red pilots can win these games where it just like seems like they had no chance is by, like evaluating the usage of their threats, their combat, when to throw things under the bus, that kind of stuff. Those are the things that help eke out match win points over, and really put them ahead of other people. And Detect Each Combat if able kind of just removes any kind of nuance to it. It's like, hey, I'm going to go fight this worm coil. It's like, oh, I wouldn't do that, dude. He's like, no, it's okay. I got it. Whereas this one is just like, hey, I have prowess. That's it.
That's all right. I just love the idea. Like, nah, it's cool, guys. It's cool, guys. I got this. You're like, no, we guarantee you don't. Like, Leroy!
Yeah. You said he was a worm? Worms are small. Come on, get your head in the game.
All right. I'm really curious about this next card. I don't know how to evaluate this. I'm talking about Muxus Goblin Grandee. 6 mana 4/4 legendary Goblin Noble for 4 red. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. Put all Goblin creature cards with CMC 5 or less from amongst them onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. When it attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other Goblin you control. Wheeler, Is this the new Goblin King?
Oh, it's as the Goblin King himself, the proclaimed premier Goblins pilot of the format. Take that, Mink. I think this card is, not absurd. This card's very good.
It's 6 mana in Goblins.
Right, but Goblins is a deck where 6 mana is not the end of the, that's fine. You have Skirk Prospector. You have multiple ways of cheating out goblins and creatures.
Aren't there only 3? Like, you've got Skirk Prospector. You have Skirk Prospector with Double Strike, whichever that one's called.
Okay, hold up. Prospector is the mana goblin.
Oh, sorry, that's the mana one.
Yeah.
I was thinking... Yeah. Oh, what was I thinking?
You're thinking Lackey.
Yeah, Goblin Lackey. Then there's the Lackey with Double Strike. And then there's Prospector, which is sack a Goblin to make that. And then you have maybe Aether Vial, which I don't think is ever getting to 6. Like, I can't think of any other ways that Goblin accelerates mana.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend tapping it to 6. Goblins accelerate... Goblins, you can play Ancient Tomb and, Moxen and whatnot, but you don't need that for acceleration. Like, Goblins in 2020 it's a whole different beast. Again, we covered this with the Conspicuous Snoop from Core 2021, and that deck has a shockingly annoying late game, and the card quality is very high. Goblin Chieftain also reduces cost. Now that I had it in my head, I wanted to get it out there. You will get to 6 mana in some games, and you don't even need your Lackey, your Prospectors, whatever, to get there. And this card just more or less can end the game the second it hits the table. Goblins is also a deck that has a lot of ways to find, goblins, to find cards. So if you need to set this up, you can absolutely do it. There is a Goblin Recruiter pile.
I was going to say, is this a new pile card? Yeah.
Yeah, this card can win the game very easily with Goblin Recruiter.
Yeah.
Because this card's very good. It's
interesting.
It looks on the surface level like a 6 mana Goblin, but
which it is.
Yeah, which it is, but that's fine.
All right, let's move on to Seth Ron Herlin General. I think I got there. 5 mana 4/4 legendary Minotaur Warrior. When it or another non-token Minotaur enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/3 red Minotaur creature token. Activated ability 2 and a Rakdos hybrid, so black-red hybrid. Minotaurs you control get +1/+0 and gain menace, and also gain haste until end of turn. Wheeler.
So I have some good news and some bad news.
Bad news first, please. Yeah.
Okay, bad news, then good news, then bad news.
Okay.
The bad news is, bad news part 1, Minotaurs are not playable. Please do not play them. I mean, if you want to, hey, I'm not going to yuck your yum, but, they're Minotaurs. It's a tribe based around the iconic one being a vanilla 3 mana 2/3.
Or a didgeridoo. Right?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
And there's just not a very high density of them is probably the biggest issue. It's even if you wanted to play a bunch of 3 mana 2/3s, there's literally just not enough to play to put in your deck.
All right, what's the good news?
The good news is that this is, I mean, as far as Minotaurs go, this is a good card. It's 2 bodies at 5 mana with an activated ability that punches through for a lot of damage. And if you're playing this in a deck that, you know, is able to get to a higher end red threat, like a big red deck, you can also theoretically get up to 8 mana. You know, you do that for a lot of your threats and all your mana rocks. And then you can have this hit the table and then bash for 8 hasty menace damage. Bad news part 2 is that there are just better things to do than that.
Yeah.
You have massive planeswalkers that you can play that can clear the board. You have artifact threats, wildfires even, which this just happens to die to. It's just, yeah. Like, if this card was printed like 5 years ago, I could foresee myself playing this. But now, not so much. I think we'll have to wait just a bit for maybe a couple more Minotaurs.
All right, let's move on then to Spiteful Prankster. 3 mana, 3/2 Devil for 2 and a red. As long as it's your turn, it has first strike. Whenever another creature dies, the Prankster deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. Jer.
Speaking of cards we are going to play, people are going to play this card. It's a much better version of Hissing Iguana. It attacks better. It triggers better. It has more toughness. It has Ancient 2 mana if that's your thing. Yeah, it's a slam dunk in Aristocrats. You can probably play it in other decks just as like a value aggressive thing. Like if you're going like the tokensy route of like all the Goblin Rabble Masters and other token generators in medium red, I could see playing it in that deck. Just creating board states where your opponent will die if they block, will die if they don't block.
Cool. Let's move then to Zerzoth Chaos Ryder. 3 mana, 2/3 legendary devil for 2 and a red. When an opponent draws their first card each turn, if it's not their turn, you create a 1/1 red devil token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever 1 or more devils you control attack 1 or more players, you and those players each draw a card, then discard a card at random. How do you feel about Chaos, Wheeler?
Outside the context of the Canadian Highlander, love this stuff. I'm Team Chaos after all. I hope I said that right. Anyways, I still can't figure out if this card is reasonable. Like, my gut says it's not good. And I think in application, it's probably going to be borderline not good to unnecessary. But it's like, I just hate... Yeah, I think that there are just better things to play. Even if it turns out this card is fine, air quotes, there are just better things to play at 3 with Ancient 2 mana in both like medium red, Gruul, like low curve-ish aggro mid-range, or just like normal red.
Let's move on to green then, and let's start with Allosaurus Shepherd. 1 mana, 1/1 elf shaman for single green, can't be countered. Green spells you control can't be countered, and 6 mana activated ability for 4 green until end of turn. Each elf creature you control becomes a 5/5 and becomes a dinosaur in addition to other types. Jer.
I wish this card was a druid so much. It's still really good though.
Is it like a shaman?
It's an elf shaman. Could it be an honorary druid?
Never lucky. You're still probably playing it in druids. I don't know.
Like, you have so many elves in that deck too, right?
You do. I could also see playing this in Hoof, and it's the most slam dunk into elf tribal that they've printed since Beast Whisper.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no contention there.
This card's really dope. I don't think you're playing it outside of those decks. Like, you need to be pretty in on the elf theme. Whether
the mana ball theme, eh? Like, just generate a bunch of mana, turn everything sideways, GG.
Yeah, like I don't think Pod is ever playing something like this. Or do you think you could ever play it in medium green, Ben?
I'm not planning on it. I was jamming this like green, like medium bigger green, where I just wanted to cast.
Well,
like,
make up your mind. Is it medium or bigger?
Medium.
Well, it was okay. It was medium-er. Like, I wasn't casting like Eldrazi, which I think is what comes to mind when you talk about big green, is like channel green sort of thing.
Yeah, Null.
Like the Pro Tour Day Tour competitor Noel Robin green. Instead, I was just like, I really want to cast like aggressive mammoth. Like, and like
aggressive
like, yeah.
mammoth.
Yeah, and I was like,
That's
and
the 88,
Terra Stomper. Yeah, 8/8 trample. Everything else is trample. Terra Stomper.
Are you playing Gaia's Revenge?
No, I should have though.
All right.
I needed another card like that. But like, yeah, I was trying to build a deck like that, and it honestly seemed fine. I needed a little bit of work, shopping to figure out where it wants to sit. But I would absolutely play this card in that. But like other, not medium green proper, but medium big green. I think I called it thick green.
It needs to be larger than medium. Let's be real here.
How many C's?
There was a couple, 3 C's.
All right,
Okay.
all right. I understand now.
To represent the 3 pips for a lot of the creatures that I was playing.
1C for the average pip count. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to Branching Evolution. 3-mana enchantment for 2 and a green. If one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put in there instead. How do you feel about doubling season for 1 cheaper but only creatures, Wheeler?
I mean, is it? Well, it's not doubling season, right? It's hardened scale. Well, I mean it is, but it's just like a hardened scales kind of effect.
I thought Hardened Scales only added 1 more. This doubles.
It does, but it's just like the iconic. Like if I think doubling season, I think someone's either planeswalker comboing or like making a bajillion tokens.
I mean, I think doubling.
Okay, well, I might be getting a little. No need for pedantry in this. We get enough from that just playing Magic. I would just, maybe consider this in the creatures deck. Like, this is so many counters, but it's not a creature. And like we mentioned this in the core 2021 set review, where so many creatures now have hey, you want to put a counter on it? Put an additional counter. Or do this thing instead. So maybe we don't need a 3-mana enchantment that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, there's also definitely diminishing returns on how many of those you put in your deck. Like having the biggest thing only matters so much. Like you don't necessarily need to go bigger.
Yeah.
Just bigger is often good enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like having a 5/5 on turn 3 is pretty good and not that much different from say like a 7/7 or an 8/8. And especially on the turn that you're like crunching in with, say, a card that we're going to mention right after this, it's overkill.
All right, well, let's talk about the other side then. Same or relative mana cost. We have a 3-drop Champion of Holt. 3-mana 1/1 Human Warrior for 1 green. Creatures with power less than Champion of Holt can't block creatures you control. A lot of people misunderstand this to think that you just can't block the champion. No, can't block your board. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Holt. Jer, this is a reprint, by the way.
Yeah, I love this card. I've played this card in my green Stompy deck for a long time. And as you say, lots of people choose not to read the first line of text properly and proceed to lose the game the first time you attack with it, which is often the last time
you attack with it, right? Yeah.
And as Ben says, the counter doublers counter doublers are insane with this card because it just gets you to the point of faltering your opponent's board much faster. It hits like a truck.
All right. Now, this is, I think, one of the more interesting cards for me in this set review is Nayeth of the Dire Hunt. 4-mana 3/3 legendary human warrior for 2 green. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control fight or become blocked, draw a card. That line of text is kind of interesting. Here's the other one. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 2 and a Gruul hybrid, so red-green hybrid. If you do, double target creature's power until end of turn. That creature must be blocked if able. Jer, what do you think?
I think this card's really powerful. The only downside is the 3/3 body, and I'm not certain if that's going to prohibit this from being played or not. My instinct is that it might, but the ability to get a lot of card advantage in an aggressive deck is really attractive, and the triggered ability is also really nice in being able to force trades out of your opponent when they wouldn't necessarily want to otherwise, and can also let you get more profitable attacks in. So this card's really interesting. A little hard to evaluate without playing it, but I think 3/3 body might be a little prohibitive for the mana cost.
Where does it go? What deck is this in?
I could see playing this in like the red-green monsters deck. I could see playing it in Like medium green is screams out for this card, I think. But
Does it go in hoof?
no, you're not really attacking with hoof unless they're toast.
Already dead.
Yeah, I think it's more so like I feel like maybe the dying to bolt might push it out of Gruul, but I could definitely see it in medium green or thick green.
Neat. All right, let's talk about the final green card, which when we sat down and started trying to trim cards so we could get this into a single episode, Jared was like, let's cut this card. I hate it. And Wheeler was like, oh, we need to talk about this.
Cool.
And that card is a reprint Sylvan Ranger. 2-mana 1/1 Elf Scout for 1 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle it. Let me light a spark on the powder cake between the two of you. Should you play this in Canadian Highlander?
Absolutely.
Jer?
No, not a chance. I've been telling people to cut this from their deck for several years, and I will continue to do so.
So this card, Pat of the Pat Pod fame, loves this card to death. And for a long time, anytime I played pod or looked at pod lists or pod offshoots, I was cutting Sylvan Ranger and being like, don't play this card. This is not a magic card.
It just gets a basic land. It doesn't even put it into play. It puts it into your hand.
Right. It's just like a draw card, but that card specifically has to be a basic sort of thing, right? And like that deck already has Elvish Visionaries galore. Like, why do we need this one? And I think that, I mean, maybe this is just my stupid pride getting in the way. I think I was correct about that for most of the time in that, like, yeah, this card should not have been played until the Mulligan change. When the London Mulligan was put into effect, I now am just 100% behind this card. I think that even to this day, people need to include more lands in their Canlander decks, and people need to build their decks in a way and include cards like this that, yeah, it's not exciting, but like build your deck so that if you cast your spells, you win the game, right? If you can cast your spells and then win the game because you have cast your spells reliably, then phenomenal. That's like a recipe for success, which sounds like a very like, well, no, duh, Ben. Like if I cast my spells, yes, that's what I'm going to try to do. But like, it's just so important, especially as a basic land, to make sure you hit your land drops, play your cards on curve, and to open up the much more powerful threats that now are available at 3 and 4, and to guarantee that, as well as to open up, hitting your lands to be able to double spell. So yeah, I'm completely sold and on team Sylvan Ranger, 100%.
All right, let's move on to artifacts then. Starting with Hedron Archive, 4-mana artifact. This is a reprint, by the way. Taps to add 2 colorless, and 2 tap and sack the archive, draw 2 cards. Wheeler.
This one's mostly just a knock at Tumor. This card's great. It's kind of just like any kind of like Academy-ish deck or ramp deck that's looking to go really big. You should probably play Hedron Archive. It adds mana. It adds 2 mana, in fact, which means then you can pump out your 2-drop accelerants. It cashes in for cards, something that, the ramp decks that are looking to get to absurd heights can find themselves in a, hey, I ramped into nothing. And I've ran out of cards, but I have infinite mana. And speaking of infinite mana, for like Academy combo decks and artifact combo decks, anytime you have a card that adds mana and can draw cards or provide some kind of like card advantage, you can combo with it. You can definitely crack this card in half and abuse it in some kind of loop. I don't play this in eggs just because it's a little too expensive, but in something like Paradox Academy or traditional, air quote, traditional Academy, this is an absolute must include, in my opinion.
Cool. Let's move on to Unstable Obelisk. 3-mana artifact, taps to add a colorless, and activated ability, 7 tap and sack, destroy target permanent. And despite this being a reprint, I've never seen this card before. Wheeler.
Well, it's from like a Commander 2015 set or something like that, and didn't really make much of a splash. But I do think that it's a card that I've at least considered, and I know Nelson has played in Academy lists.
I've played it before too.
It's popped up
How was it?
Well, it's fine. It has a thing that it's looking to do. Like, if you need it, it's nice to have, because that's not something that your deck as an Academy ramp deck is traditionally going to be able to do, right? Just be able to get rid of something, a pesky permanent. And you do get some amount, like now you get some amount of like, I mean, you always got some amount of flex slots for your like ramp cards at like 3 for these Academy decks. But like after Manascape Refractor came out in the Commander 2020 product, you're basically down to like 1 card. Like you get this one kind of like pick your poison ramp card. And I think Obelisk is worth considering, again, depending on what the rest of your like utility card configuration looks like.
I think once again it's also a bit meta dependent. Like I played it when there was a lot of creature combo going around, which I'm usually favored against, but sometimes just having this can stop them from winning if they happen to have a better draw than I did on the Academy combo deck. And it did come up, so worth considering, as Ben says.
All right, let's talk about lands now. There's 2 lands, and that's it for our set review. First up, we have Phyrexian Tower. Reprint legendary land. Tap to add a colorless, or tap, sack a creature, add black. Wheeler, who's playing Phyrexian Tower and why?
I am, and in Sandy B, aka Pattern Rector. And you know what? Probably you should. I mean, not you, Serge.
Me specifically?
No, well, I mean, yeah, sure, why not? I mean, hey, maybe this card's fine in Workshop Aggro now that I'm thinking about it. Cash in a useless creature and ramp to something worthwhile.
I already cut Hovermere.
Okay.
How dare you?
That's all
How
I
dare
needed.
you?
That's all I needed. But yeah, kill this on sight if you can. If your opponent has this and they're playing stuff like a creature combo deck, usually it's advisable. But like also, if you can afford it in like a Golgari or like a Sultai kind of like survival of the fittest recurring nightmare deck, it's pretty good at setting up, your value reanimation spells, cashing in like a Wall of Blossoms again into something relevant. Yeah, it's a good card to see more of. I mean, it got a reprint in I think Ultimate Masters, but it's definitely up there with like originally this card suffered a lot from availability issues, and now to have it more easily available, I hope more people are going to experiment with this in their decks.
I've seen it played pretty effectively in mono black aggro as well.
Ooh.
Yeah,
You can use it to skip the curve when some creatures sort of become a little obsolete on the board.
yeah, or like Bloodghast, Bitter Blossom tokens, like
Exactly.
that deck can use this surprisingly well.
And the final card of our set review today, Riptide Laboratory. It's a land that taps for a colorless? Yes, it's been errata. And 1 and a blue, and tap, return target wizard you control to its owner's hand. Jer.
A blast from the past. Traditionally used with like Glenalendra, Venser, Vendilion Clique to sort of pseudo attempt to lock your opponent out in a long game. I'm not sure how good it is anymore. It's just a little clunky, and often these decks, the control decks, are now playing 3 colors, which makes the cost of putting colorless lands in your deck just that much more. I haven't played it in a while though, so it could be worth revisiting and looking at the available wizard options.
I mean, in mono blue, in the like mono blue devotion, mono blue mid range, or pardon Germans out there, the Zauberer, kind of like the wizardy kind of deck that was ported over from Germanlander. It's quite good in that. I found it to be kind of cute. Maybe it's a bit much, but honestly, maybe it's a bit much now that crop rotation's pointed. But honestly, it was kind of all right in like a blue-green opposition Time Walk style deck, where I had crop rotation and Sylvan Scrying because I wanted to find Gaia's Cradle so that I could take advantage of a bunch of mana on useless creatures so that I could, take infinite turns. And if you happen to have that, you could Riptide Laboratory your Archaeomancer to recast Time Walk. That, I guess that new wizard is also technically a wizard. The 5-drop one that we talked about from Core Set. Like, there are a lot of just like, oops, surprise, I'm a wizard cards that are kind of busted in our format.
Yeah.
The one that always gets me is Avid Mind Sensor. Stupid bird wizard.
Idiot bird.
Why are you a bird wizard?
It doesn't even have a hat.
Hat's very important, right? Like if the art is flying, it should fly, and if it wears a hat, it should be a wizard, right?
No hat, no staff, not a wizard. Don't at me.
Not a wizard.
Any final thoughts on Jumpstart, friends? This set has some interesting cards, but nothing that I think is going to blow the format wide open.
Yeah, it's sort of like
No.
some niche things here and there, but as you say, not too many like super exciting things. Like from a new set, there's usually like a handful of really exciting cards that might shake stuff up a bit, but here it's
Based on discussion, tiny bones, right? Like,
Well, I'm kind of into this set, right? Like it's I could definitely go for like a year of not having, Uros and
don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. I'm just it's almost a nice change of pace, really, as opposed to just like having to be like, oh, Oko, oh, Uro, oh.
it's you just got like a handful of these really cool kind of like cool and genuinely powerful cards. They just fit like either a very specific niche or archetypes that aren't as like widely explored
Sure.
as other ones, or like they don't fit super well into just like I'm generic value mid-range.
And that's one thing I found I've been saying a lot more recently is that cards are cool and they have like really high synergy potential, as opposed to, as you say, just like the like hit you in the face, I am powerful, play me cards.
Yeah, I feel like for a long time, like not even specific to our set reviews, but like cool ended up being synonymous with like bad. But now cool, like when somebody's describing a card.
Yeah, if you say it's cool, you're like, it means it's unplayable, but you like it. Yeah.
How's this card? Oh, it's cool, but like now
You can't call it good, eh?
Yeah, but like now, if a card is bad, like it's so evidently detached from like the actual really good cards in the format. But you get cards like this, cards that we see in the set that they have powerful effects. They're pretty reasonably cost. They just have a niche application or push you to build in a certain way or adopt a certain like sub strategy or like sub theme to a traditional like mid-range deck or aggro deck. And they're genuinely cool. Like they're cool.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for our set review today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you think we missed any cards, let us know in the comments down below. Reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.